Well, there is no shortage of topics for us to discuss when it comes to the weather outlook here for the week ahead and stretching a little beyond that as well, as we've seen big winter storms. We, of course, have devastating wildfires in the U.S. to talk about, and we're watching some dryness concerns in parts of South America. Joining us now to talk about all of it, Eric Snodgrass with Conduit is with us for our weekly weather update. Eric, thanks for being here. And we could start in a couple of different places. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the devastating wildfires out west that affecting so many folks in and around LA, and the Santa Ana winds playing a role here. Just a lot of devastation and a lot of issues impacting millions of folks.
Yeah, and the risk was always there going into the season because of La Nina. Typically, La Ninas do not produce good flow going into California, Arizona, and New Mexico. The southern tier of the United States. But what happened this year was quite unique. Part of it was very, very La Nina-esque, and some of it is not. And this is what I mean. Since December, we've been talking about this extended piece of the jet stream. It's not nearly what it was, but it just raced from Japan all the way to north of Hawaii at 200 miles an hour. It split north, created a deep low in the Gulf of Alaska, well, really more toward the Aleutian Islands, and then this big Pacific ridge to the south of it. And this is what's problematic about La Nina winters. Sometimes during a normal winter, and especially during an El Nino winter, we'll get two components to the jet stream. One that comes out of the polar regions and one that comes out of the subtropics. La Ninas don't have that. And so if you actually look back over the last 45 days and you look at the anomalous flow, so in other words, take the average, take this year, take the subtraction, and you get the anomaly, right? It's actually been coming out of the east. So the problem here is symptomatic of a bigger issue. And this is what I think we need to talk about. So yes, there are still 4 more days this week, Monday through Thursday, where we're concerned about the risk of more wildfires in the LA basin. And part of that is being promoted by a big Pacific ridge. Part of it's being promoted by this little cutoff low over the Baja. Part of it's being promoted by the fact that the soil moisture in the whole of the Southwest getting into Mexico is incredibly low, and they've not had much of any precipitation this winter. Now, you go to Northern California, they're way ahead of normal. So it's just the difference, the Northwest versus the Southwest. Okay, all of that is to get to this. That dryness, due to the lack of subtropical jet stream flow, we didn't have last year. So if you remember last year, when we finished winter and got into spring, there was about a massive drought reduction because we have 2 pieces of the jet stream coming into the United States. This year, we've got one highly variable component to it. It's what's driving the brutally cold air that's going to come in 2 different waves in the next 10 days. It's what made snow possible from Dallas all the way to North Carolina last week. And then before that, from Kansas City, which shut Kansas City down all the way to Washington, D.C. But the reality is that without having a subtropical portion of the jet stream, we're going to still see drought areas emerge. And these are the ones I'm concerned about. So where are they right now? Mostly in the plains. The northern plains technically in drought, also in a bit of a snow drought up there as well. And then you get down into, again, pockets of the southern plains, but really West Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Southern California, and Mexico. And nearly every model wants to take that and just push it north as spring goes on. So Jesse, here's what I'm really worried about. If I could tell you something that I want you to ask me about at least twice a month for the next 6 months, it's this. Is there any reason to continue to think that the Midwest, the Corn Belt's going to have a stormy, wet spring followed by a hotter, drier summer? Because right now, if you pin me down and said, what are you thinking about? That's what I'm thinking about. So we could have a very, very odd year setting up because of the way all these pieces are moving around this winter. Now, it's a long ways out from where any of that could happen, but I want to tell you why we're so concerned about these wildfires. They're symptomatic of these bigger issues, and if we have to just think about one thing going forward, it's what do those bigger issues mean, not only in the near term, but in the longer term? So, Jesse, that is my long answer to your short question, but that's what I'm thinking about.
Well, and picking this apart a little more and looking further out, you mentioned some of the brutal cold air that's going to move in. And I grabbed one of the charts from your agweather.com website. And this kind of goes to illustrate some of this extremely cold air that is going to be moving in here over the next several days, it sounds like, Eric.
Yeah, look at Alaska in this map, right? So Alaska is extremely warm, and that is where the big Pacific Ridge is influencing the temperatures. In fact, even this morning, it was warmer in places throughout Alaska than it is in most of the central US and Northeast. And so, look, we've got a warm up coming middle of the week. Like Thursday is going to be mild, and then this is just going to open up in a big way as we get into the weekend. And the hope was that that particular pattern was also going to be delivering some big snow, and it's just not there anymore. I think the pattern is too dry for that to occur. So I was pretty excited about, telling my kids and telling farmers like, "Hey, we got more snow coming." And but the reality is, I think that the cold's coming in with relatively dry conditions. Now, who am I talking about? I'm talking about the central US, the Midwest. There is a glimmer of hope of a one system this Saturday, Sunday, but don't put too much rest in it or too much hope in it. Excuse me. We're drier West Coast. We're drier in the central United States. The Great Lakes will keep making their lake effect snow, but that's really about it, I think, in this pattern.
Well, and of course, watching this pattern, it's going to be very interesting just how this all unfolds over the next several weeks ahead. And to your point earlier, what could we be looking at as we get into summer? Obviously, a long ways away, but it's going to be something that, especially considering the current ag economy and more, it's going to be a big, big variable that farmers are going to be watching over the next several months, right, Eric?
Yeah, and there's going to be worry about drought. There is always worry about drought, but there is a little bit greater cause for concern this year, I think, than in past. Usually in January, I'm just like, don't worry about it. We have to wait and see how spring is. But if you start looking at some of the boxes that have been checked, like the super dry fall, that's still in the soil moisture deficits down deep. You look at the fact that we have a La Nina. What do we typically know? Well, 6 and 10 times if a La Nina fades in winter, which is what it typically does, you tend to get risk of Central Plains, Midwest dryness by the time you get to July and August, and heat as well. And the culprit, the thing that creates all this is that post La Nina events tend to have just weaker atmospheric momentum. In other words, the atmosphere has a flow to it. And when you slow it down, guess what it likes to do? Build up into big ridges. And those ridges are what kills the pattern. So I'm concerned about all these things. And I'm just going to tell you what I'm going to be watching. Every time that this happens in the past, when the atmosphere loses momentum, what we need to watch most carefully is late May through August. If the ocean temperatures in the Gulf of Alaska start to drop, that is the symptom to the atmosphere's loss of momentum, curling up lows in the Gulf of Alaska, not over the Midwest. So they don't make it over the mountains. And we have drought stress. So that's what I'm going to be watching every single day from now until then. If we're going to talk about Midwestern drought this year, that's what's going to have to happen. That and the Bermuda High has to leave. And they tend to happen together in tandem. So I still think there's risk on the table for 2025. And I think a lot of folks want there to be some sort of risk like that on the table so that markets will start to react and do something. A nice, good weather shock to the system is what some folks are hoping for. They just don't want it to happen on their farms. And I get that. I understand that fully.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and thinking of a weather risk, let's talk about South America. Argentina, for instance, that's been a talked about point here, and it's been gaining momentum in the markets. What's the latest you are seeing with South American weather, Eric?
Yeah. So where it's been dry in the last, let's call it 3 to 4 weeks, has been pockets of Santa Catarina, Rio Grande do Sul. Those are the two southernmost states in Brazil. Uruguay, parts of Paraguay, and along the Parana River Basin, which goes through a place called Entre Rios. It goes through Santa Fe and toward Buenos Aires. This is by like the Rosario Grain Exchange, that whole area. All right. That's not like a massive part of Brazil or Argentina's growing area, but it's important. Okay. And we've seen storms in the interior of Argentina, and it's been soaking wet farther to the north. So the center west, the whole northern growing area, 50% of it's soaking wet. All right. My narrative has been if we can get past the 25th of the month and rains comes back. So what is that? 12 days from now, I don't think it's going to matter as much. But if we continue to see the drier risks building in, which we are right now, plus the heat that's coming into Argentina this week, well, we got a story now that some of the full season crop may be dealing with some drought. But always the question is how much? And if you knock off yields on average 5 bushel in that area, 10 bushel in that area, is that enough to spark some big, market story driven by a weather premium? And I'm not sure, but I can tell you this. Let's bring this all together. If La Nina dominates, Argentina tends to have a drier risk going forward into the remainder of their summer. Um, If La Nina fades fast, the first thing that will happen is that the MJO will sneak over to phase 4 or 5. Guess what that does? That tends to promote some dryness farther to the north. If neither of those two things happen and persistence wins, I think we have a story in Argentina with some yield loss due to drought. Either way, I think the market's going to be looking at weather in South America right now, trying to assess how good the crop is north and if there's problems to the south. And if you go over to agweather.com, you can look at all the maps yourself. They're all there. I put them there every day. And you can see how some of the drier risks are showing up. So yes, I think there is a narrative coming out of mainly Argentina and southern Brazil, but I'm not going to go out there and start swinging for the fences and telling everybody major yield loss. I'm going to tell folks the smartest, most measured thing to do is watch the next 15 days. If it is still going on after the 25th to the 27th, in other words, in February, we're not talking about rains returning, then there's a story.
Again, folks can go to agweather.com for more information, ag-wx.com. Eric Snodgrass with Conduit. Always good to chat with you, my friend. Have an awesome week, and we will talk to you next week.
All right. See you, Jesse.